Back like we never left B.D.A. and honestly this is not the video I had planned today. This is different from what I wanted to talk about because I had something in mind as far as talking about Eustace Kid and a quick analysis of his character. However, while going through the comment section of my most recent video, someone asked the question or disagreed with me about how the Supernova had been handled, and they really enjoyed the Supernova and how they've been throughout the story. I'm not going to say I vehemently disagree, but I do disagree in regards to what the Supernova had been introduced to be as opposed to what we know they are to be now. I want to make the distinction early between the Supernova and the Worst Generation because those are two different things, and in the Worst Generation I think brings more credence to that entire group because of who is involved, while the Supernova has a distinct purpose as Oda has shown in the story. So let's talk about the Worst Generation first and what they are actually. The Worst Generation is pretty much the 11 super rookies, the Supernova, and Blackbeard. They're called the Worst Generation because a lot of the major conflicts or major events around the world revolve around these characters. So they were called one of the Worst Generation because they are the problem children between the end of the golden age of pirates and then the beginning of the new age. So this is the Worst Generation. The Worst Generation consists of Blackbeard, Luffy, Law, Kid, Apu, Hawkins, Zoro, Capone, Drake, Killer, Bonnie, and Urouge. The reason why I made the distinction early as far as the Worst Generation versus the Supernova is because the Worst Generation consists of Blackbeard as well. And Blackbeard, based on everything he's done throughout the story, that can actually match Luffy and his journey throughout the story. So for Blackbeard and everything he's accomplished, going from a relative unknown on Whitebeard's crew to a Yonko and a major force in the New World, or in the One Piece world in general, that brings credence to this group, outside of Luffy of course. The others, for the most part, they have done things, but not nearly on the level of what Luffy has accomplished. There was an article that leaked a couple of years ago that references Oda and his conversation around the Supernova and the Worst Generation, and Oda basically says that he didn't have plans for these characters to be in Sabaody, and he thought he needed some way to spice it up, and then he just created these characters. So for a lot of these characters, they were created on the fly, and that's how it seems like they were just dropped into the story. And even all of those things that had been documented to happen, it seems like it was just tongue-in-cheek, or it's just a way to hype up this generation or these Supernova. The only other character's actions that actually feel real is Blackbeard because we see the ramifications of the things he's done. This video is not to completely shit on the Worst Generation because I enjoy every character from the Worst Generation, regardless to how little we know about them. But really all I'm doing is giving you my perspective on what they were introduced to do and everything they accomplished and where we're going in the story with this generation and the super rookies in general. Again, this is centered around the Supernova, not the Worst Generation, so we're going to essentially leave Blackbeard out of this one because we know everything that Blackbeard has accomplished and what he brings to the table, so there's no need to actually go over that. Now let's get to the super rookies, and these are the top rookie pirates that arrived at Sabaody, and they became famous for their bold actions against the world government and accumulating a bounty over 100 million berry, each of them. And again, these are the characters I mentioned earlier, minus Blackbeard. So this is a bit of a tangent, but it is related. But I was watching Rise of a Shield Hero recently, and how they handled these strong characters early in the story is brilliant in my opinion. When I say strong characters, these are the characters that were meant to compete with our main character, and they were giving more credence to these characters than Oda has ever done to the Supernova. So to reveal some without spoiling, what they did with these characters is to include everything they did and to have it intertwined with the main character's route. So essentially, as the main character went through the story, they gave us some information and background as to his rivals and everything that they were doing while the main character was doing what he was doing. So the main character consistently ran into things that the other characters had done and even sometimes had to fix them because they were wreaking havoc throughout the world. I get it, for the Supernova, they're not planned, and throughout the story up until Sabaody, they're non-existent. So for them, it seems like they were just dropped into the story, and that is part of the problem. Yes, when you get to Sabaody, it's an amazing thing when Shaki goes through all these characters and gives us some characters that could actually compete with Luffy or seemingly on Luffy's level because of the bounty they had accumulated. Granted, Kid was the only character with a bounty higher than Luffy's, and they even included a quick caveat saying that his bounty is higher, or his bounty is that high because he also kills civilians. A common misconception is that Kid's bounty is only high because he kills civilians, but no, he's also strong, but it is higher because he kills civilians, not because he's not strong. So these characters, for the most part, they were supposed to be Luffy's competition throughout the New World, and they were supposed to bring about spectacular event after spectacular event, and for the most part, I don't think they've lived up to that hype. So what we're going to do is go through each character's accomplishments so far and see how they stack up in any way to Luffy and how we project them going forward in the story. The only character I'm not going to get too much in depth with is Luffy, because we know what Luffy's done. We've actually seen it. Burning the world government's flag at Enies Lobby, breaking into Impel Down, his impact in the War of the Best, taking down several warlords and opposing even admirals in the story. The accomplishments of the others are not as vast. First, let's talk about Law and his impact in the story. Law has probably been the most relevant supernova after Luffy in the story, based on his interactions with Luffy, and it seems to be only relevant because of Luffy. And again, that's another problem. It seems like the supernova have no standalone value, and they're only relevant when they interact with Luffy. We all remember what Law did to save Luffy after the War of the Best, and now we're still questioning why he did that, because that was not really explained. It seemed like it was just a random thing that Law chose to do. But then we meet Law again at Punk Hazard. We get some information in regards to what Law had been doing as far as becoming a warlord, delivering the hearts of 100 pirates to the world government, and the Rocky Port incident that is shrouded in mystery because we have no idea what it is. All we know is that Kobe was anointed a hero of that event or that incident, which more than likely means that Law did some things and Kobe got credit for it. Now, don't get me wrong, Law is an amazing character, but from what they were propped up to be, the worst generation, the supernova, in essence, to compete with Luffy, Law at this point has become a subservient partner. With everything that happened in Dressrosa, Law did carry his own weight, and even Punk Hazard, he helped the Straw Hats a lot. But at this point, it's hard to see Law even opposing Luffy or trying to compete for anything. And of course, we know being the Pirate King isn't his goal, and he wants to know more about the will of D and becoming closer with everything Corazon was trying to protect and everything Corazon knew about the will of D. But isn't it a bit weird that Law is just so okay with being under Luffy and working with Luffy? I understand the alliance is still intact because the goal is to take down Kaido. That was the goal initially, and of course we know Law was being facetious or straight up was lying about it because his true goal was to take down Doflamingo. And of course he wanted to take down Doflamingo because of everything Doflamingo did to Corazon. But what do we think happens after taking down Kaido? Do we see Law actually doing any harm to Luffy or trying to compete with Luffy whatsoever for becoming the Pirate King? It's hard to see. I do see the alliance ending, but I don't see Law being a character that's going to compete with Luffy for this title. To be frank, Law has helped Luffy a lot more than he's actually tried to hurt him. And another issue with the Supernova is that we don't know anything about their crews. The other relevant character in Law's crew is Beppo, and of course we know about John Bart, among other characters, but they have no battle accomplishments or prowess based on what we've seen. And John Bart got beaten by minks, not random minks, some of the stronger minks in Zou, but they can't stack up to what Luffy's crew has done and what Luffy's crew is infamous for. If the next most relevant Supernova can't stack up, can any of them? Let's move on to Eustace Captain Kidd, and this is the guy who had a higher bounty than Luffy at Sabaody. And for Kidd, he had a lot of promise because he seemed to be like the character that would never be subservient to Luffy, a character that would always go about things his own way. Kidd always had a unique perspective to him because he was one of the characters that believed in the One Piece early and would kill, of course, people who undermined or laughed at his dream. Kidd also had relevant crew members, and he was the other Supernova who had a vice captain as a part of that group as well. So for Kidd, we viewed him as the only other character that could maybe stack up to Luffy. Until you go to the tape. In comparison to Luffy, what has Kidd actually done? Luffy has taken out several warlords, accomplished amazing feats, participated in great battles. The most we've heard from Kidd is that he's opposed pretty much every Yonko except Blackbeard, but he hasn't come out on the right side of that. A lot of Kidd's shenanigans have revolved around civilians and doing just bad things to regular people. Granted, interacting with all these Yonko and not actually dying is a great feat, but we don't have any relevant feats in the story or anything that he's done in the past to even stack up to Luffy's resume pre-time skip. And this was the guy with the higher bounty. I'll talk about bounties towards the end of the video, but you understand what I'm saying. Based on Kidd's usage and even the revelations in Wano, it seems like Kidd is a cautionary tale of what you do or what Luffy would be without plot armor. I'll save that for my Kidd specific video, but just think on that. Kidd's partner Killer, and a lot of people has put Killer in the same range as Zoro because he was the other vice captain in the Supernova, hasn't really accomplished anything either. The things we know about Killer now actually takes away from some of his lore as he actually fought Zoro and lost. There are some variables around on the actual encounter, but still, he lost. And we know next to nothing about Killer other than what's been told to us by Kid and different instances in the story. We can use context clues based on him bringing the alliance together with Apu and Hawkins, but for Killer, no real relevant feats in comparison to what we know about Zoro. Again, that is part of the problem. Unless these characters are interacting with the Straw Hats or on screen, it seems like they don't do anything other than lose to other major characters. Scratchman Apu has done next to nothing in this story based on what we know so far. Of course, he was part of the alliance with Hawkins and Kid, but as far as his accomplishments and feats, we have none listed. There's nothing we can really document. Currently, all we know about Apu is that he flipped on the alliance when Kaido fell in front of them, and there's not much more to say. I guess he's one of the few characters to attack Kizaru and somehow quote-unquote damage him, but he didn't use Haki, so it had actually no impact at all. But there's nothing really to talk about with Apu. All we know is that he's one of the characters that wandered into Big Mom's territory as well and was forced to flee. So of course he can't compete. For Basil Hawkins, we get more about him in Wano, but for the most part he is a subordinate of Kaido. But it seems like the popular theory is that eventually Hawkins is going to flip and somehow help us with Kaido. They mentioned earlier in this story or in Wano that he has a particular card that makes someone fight beyond their means. So that could be something that could bolster Luffy versus Kaido. However, Hawkins is another character in which we don't know anything about his prior feats or things he's accomplished even after meeting Luffy. He seems like yet again another stepping stone to help Luffy and aid in his travels or in his battles. Capone Gangbage, and I think for me personally, was not a liked character previously before Whole Cake Island because it just seemed like he was a character that used his devil fruit power with other characters inside him. It was just a wonky weird thing, and I didn't particularly like his design that much when he was introduced to Sabaody. However, he grew on me in Whole Cake Island because he seemed to be, of course, a mafioso, and just his bond and love for his family, you have to respect that and how he cared about his kid. But for Capone Gangbage, most of his accomplishments, they documented the type of person that he was, which he aimed for heads of governments, heads of state, important people. He just wanted their heads. Why couldn't we have Capone take out a warlord and take the head of a warlord? Because those are important people. Those would get you noticed. But for Capone, that was never the case. The people that Capone has taken out, we know nothing of, and they have no relevance in the story. Capone's shining moments comes with Luffy. And I guess for this instance, it's the Straw Hat story, and essentially it's Luffy's story. So for Luffy, these characters are only going to be relevant on screen when Luffy is on screen. But for a story, I think it brings more realism and credence to other characters not named the main character when they can accomplish things outside of the main character. Just to use another story as a reference, Hunter x Hunter. Hunter x Hunter currently is surviving without Gon being a major part of the story. Even going back to the York New arc, everything Kurapika had accomplished without Gon was amazing. The other powerful characters in the story should not be handicapped and have their accomplishments shown on screen or not shown at all unless the main character is involved. People may view Kurapika as one of the main characters with Killua and Leorio, but at this point it seems like Law is a Straw Hat himself. For X Drake, we don't know that much about him. From what we know, he was a strong character when he was a kid, but was very scared and very fearful of things, and we saw everything that happened with him with his dad and how he was pretty much killed by Doflamingo. Then X Drake ran away, became a rear admiral, or became a marine, grew through the ranks, became a rear admiral, then left the Marines and became a pirate. Any accomplishments before then, we don't know. All we know about him is that he went to Kaido and did things to get Kaido's attention. Now he's part of Kaido's crew as one of the Flying Six. Again, we feel like X Drake is going to be a character that flips on Kaido, and he's going to be one of the characters that would help Luffy to defeat Kaido and his crew. Jewelry Bonnie is an interesting character because I think her relevance, it's different because of her specific set of powers and what we got from her during the Reverie. Bonnie has been involved in major obscure events, and she's one of the characters that I'm most interested in because a lot of her things are so obscure. So for one thing was she was crying after Whitebeard died, and now we know for the most part it probably was because of Kuma, and Kuma was a cyborg and a mindless zombie at Marineford, so that could be what she was crying about. We saw that she went all the way to Marijoa to somehow break Kuma out and help Kuma in some way because Kuma is now a slave of the Celestial Dragons. So for Bonnie and her connection to Kuma, that makes it a lot more interesting. But we also have to remember that Bonnie was captured by Blackbeard and given to the world government, or specifically Akainu, for a particular reason. And Akainu was even saying, I thought we lost you and I'm happy we caught you. So for Bonnie, and the reason for the world government wanting Bonnie, that's anyone's guess, but we're assuming it's for a devil fruit power. And she's since then gotten away. But for Bonnie and competing with Luffy, that's not her thing. Urouge is a light character in the community, and he became a meme somewhat because of his laugh, and he I'm not sure if you guys have seen Sheer the Urouge, but Urouge is a character that rose to prominence after we found out that he defeated the Sweet Commander of Big Mom. And for the Sweet Commanders of Big Mom, we saw how Luffy actually struggled with these characters. So we were expecting big things from Urouge, but Urouge for the most part has been a blip on the radar in the story. He had his moment with Kaido when Kaido fell from Sky Island. We don't know that much about Urouge other than his backstory with Enel and everything that transpired there in his hometown. However, being the Pirate King doesn't seem to be Urouge's goal. And again, for these characters, it seems like they all have different distinct goals, and Oda has made them interesting in different ways. But for them being a part of this generation, a part of Luffy's generation, let's be honest here, their goal or their purpose seems to be clear: to advance Luffy's agenda. For all these characters and everything that they're trying to accomplish, the only other character that somehow has some semblance of a goal similar to Luffy's is Eustace Captain Kidd. And for Kidd, his known bounty right now is 470 million berry, and of course it's going to go up after Wano, but Luffy is currently at 1.5 billion. Luffy's bounty is probably going to go up after Wano as well, so they're not going to catch up to Luffy in regards to bounty. So my main issue comes from them being competition for Luffy, because that's certainly not the case. They're interesting, quirky characters that were dropped out of nowhere in the story, and you can feel it because pre-time skip, again, Luffy accomplished all of those things. It would have been great if Luffy went to a town, say he went to Alabasta, and it mentioned something about one of those characters that did something, and then Luffy, oh, this character came here beforehand, and now Luffy has to change this. We know how Oda came up with these characters. They were somehow out of the blue, and I guess post-time skip, he's trying to change that by having Luffy interact with a different supernova seemingly every arc, save Fishman Island, because that was just a showcase arc. At Punk Hazard, he had the Law interactions. In Dressrosa, it was the Law interactions. In Zoe, we still had Law. In Whole Cake, we had Capone. And now Wano, we have X Drake, Hawkins, Kid. Sure, we're gonna have a Pooh, some killer stuff. So yeah, as characters, I think the Worst Generation or the Supernova, they're really cool. But when you look at the numbers and everything they've accomplished, Luffy is way out of their league. Luffy and Blackbeard are far and away the most impressive supernova, or part of the Worst Generation, I should say. I still have some hope for Eustace Kidd, but based on everything that's happening to him, again, he is somewhat of a cautionary tale, and Luffy without plot armor. I really enjoy all of these characters, and I know a lot of people do as well. But personally, I think based on how they've been introduced, they can compete with Luffy. People mention Luffy's rival to be actually Blackbeard and the other Yonko, and at this point, I can't disagree with that. Yeah, they're part of his generation, a part of his super rookie class, but he's certainly outclassed all of them by a wide margin. It would have been a lot better if for a lot of the major events, someone other than Luffy would be involved, like for Marineford. Of course, Law came towards the end, but Impel Down. Yes, these characters are involved in the major events in the story, but these major events seem to revolve solely around Luffy, and they are involved as well, so it's because of Luffy. Personally, I like them, but I was just expecting a lot more from these characters, and for them to make their own path and carve out their own way to be competing with Luffy for the title of Pirate King. Big News Morgans said as much, saying someone from the Worst Generation is going to become the Pirate King. I'm not sure why he said that. He should have just said Luffy or Blackbeard is going to become the Pirate King, because we know nobody else on that list can really compete. Maybe Captain Kidd, but nobody else on that list is going to be as relevant or as strong or portrayed as powerful as Luffy and Blackbeard. And of course, in regards to accomplishments, they're way behind those two. But yeah, give me your thoughts. That's just how I feel about the Supernova. And maybe I had too high of expectations for them, what they can accomplish, but hopefully they can change my mind after Wano or during Wano, and they can kind of carve out their own way and get some credit for some of this stuff that happens in Wano. But of course, Luffy's going to get credit as well. So again, I understand it's Luffy's story. It's around the Straw Hats. They're going to be relevant, but can we get some crew members for these people? Can Oda make some of that relevant to make this rivalry or this generation feel like somewhat of a rivalry? For it to feel real? We had Beppo being captured by Orochi's guys, for Christ's sake. And Beppo is Law's right-hand guy. I know Zoro has been captured in a lot of arcs as well, but we know Zoro's strength and what he can do. And Beppo, he hasn't shown much in combat. So we'll see. Let me know what you thought about this video. Leave your comments below, because I do read a lot of the comments, and I still plan on making a comment video eventually. So yeah, make sure you like the video and be sure to subscribe, and I'll catch you guys in the next one. Peace.